Those eyes disguise our height. Bright lights decide the fight. Your heart beats fast despite the truth that love is blind. I just wanna feel anything, anything with you, with you. I just wanna feel anything, anything with you, with you.
Welcome to the Clean and Filthy podcast with your host, Matthew M.
Hello and welcome to the Clean and Filthy podcast, where we are clean and serene with a filthy mind in between. My name is Matthew M. I am your host, and I am also an addict in recovery. Welcome back, everybody, to episode 25 of the Clean and Filthy podcast. Absolutely crazy that we are here at episode 25. I'm so blessed and grateful for all of the support and all the positive feedback, and I really feel like we are doing something to help change the world. Even if it's the tiniest, teeniest, most minuscule little something, it's something. And for an addict like me, that means everything. So welcome. I hope everybody had a blessed week. My week was a little crazy. We'll get into discussing that a little bit further on in the show, but hopefully everybody's blessed. Hopefully everybody's staying healthy. COVID cases are back on the rise, and I mean, it's some scary times, but hopefully everybody out there is doing well. Before we get any further, we got to give a huge thank you to our episode sponsors. That is Etc. by Emily. If you are looking for a job or you are looking for event or party staffing for a party or event that you're having, check out Etc. by Emily. All the information down in the description below. If you head over there and you end up getting a job, let them know that you heard about them from Matthew M. on the Clean and Filthy podcast. Again, thank you very much for the continued support. Got to give a huge thank you to our episode theme music. Actually, it's just the whole podcast theme music, and that is Anything by Valentino Khan and Allison Wonderland. Thank you so much to Mad Decent Records for allowing me the privilege of hearing that musical masterpiece every single time on my podcast, twice a day. Thank you for that. Also have to give a huge what up and thank you shout out to all of our VIP supporters. These are the people who are supporting this podcast on Patreon. Easiest way to do that, if you would like to join our awesome VIP supporters, is to head over to the website, www.cleanandfilthypodcast.com. In the top right corner, all of the social media links are listed. Click on all of them. You guys should all be following, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, soon to be Discord, YouTube. Head on over there. Click like on everything. Click share on everything. Share it with everybody on everything.
That part.
And I really appreciate it. But while doing that, you can head over to Patreon and you can help this podcast grow by making donations to us. And if you do, you will get one of these amazing Clean and Filthy podcast stickers to put wherever you like it. It helps us brand, helps us grow. And people are like, oh, hey, that's a cool sticker. What's that about? And then you can be like, oh, hey, it's this moderately funny dude named Matthew M. He has a recovery podcast. Check it out. And then y'all help me, which in turn helps more people. Let's go. So if you want to do that and you want to be one of the VIP supporters, head on over to the website. Website is still having some issues, but we'll talk about that in a second. And if you do become a VIP supporter, you will get your name shout out on air like these amazing people who have been helping this podcast grow. And they are Alex B., Sage A, Cindy, Stephanie, Shar, Liana, Clint, and Alex T. Thank you all so much. It is so greatly appreciated, your continued support to this podcast and helping, not only believing in this product and believing in the what we're trying to do here, but also being a part of what we're doing here. So thank you so very much. So who are we? We are the Clean and Filthy Podcast, and we are live every single Tuesday at 5 p.m. Arizona time, live on YouTube.com, with episodes available for download wherever you consume your podcast later on tonight or every Tuesday night. We are listed on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We're listed on Spotify, Deezer. If there's a podcast directory, we're on it. So definitely check us out. All of that information is listed on our website. And while we are still having issues having the newest episodes uploaded to the website, I have posted the links on all of my social media to our Buzzsprout account, which takes you directly to every single episode, so you don't have any excuse to be behind. You can't use my website being a little wonky donkey as a reason to be behind on the Clean and Filthy Podcast. So that's where to find us. All right, well, what are we? If you're somebody who's just here because I hop on Twitter and I get a little tweeting out and start trying to get everybody to come through, hi, welcome. This is the Clean and Filthy Podcast, and I am your host, Matthew M., who also happens to be an addict in recovery. We are a 12-step recovery-based podcast. As I said, every single week we're dropping new episodes. The whole point of this podcast is to develop a community of recovering addicts or of people who have questions about recovering addicts or the disease of addiction or what it's like going through addiction and transitioning into recovery and the journey and the spiritual principles that we employ in our lives. This podcast is about developing and cultivating those relationships and to become an opportunity to spread knowledge and love and compassion and empathy, to try to get rid of the stigma that's often associated with the disease of addiction, to get rid of the stigma that people like myself personally had about addicts or about what an addict is, which is interesting because we're going to be talking about what an addict is later on in the show. So you're going to have to stick around. See that little teaser? Ooh, stick around. So that's what we're here to do. We're here to make sure that we have unity and a collective group effort to become a beacon of hope, a beacon of happiness, a beacon of joy, a beacon of all of the positive things that I personally have experienced over my last 3.5 years in recovery. So that's what we're here to do. But I want to make sure to stay in line with the traditions. So we will not be identifying or endorsing one specific type of 12-step fellowship. I will not be speaking personally on what my home group is or what fellowship I go to or what treatment center I went to, or giving recommendations on air about treatment centers or sober livings or the fellowship you should go to or any of those things. That's not what we're here to do. We want to stay unified. But if you have questions about any of those topics that we do not cover here on air, please reach out to me. I'm here to help, and I have some resources, some contacts. So please reach out to me. The easiest way to do that is you can either email me at matthew@cleanandfilthypodcast.com or hit me up on any of the social medias. As I said, we are on all of them, and y'all should be following us on all of them. So that's the easiest way to find us. And while this can be a great added bonus to your recovery, or it can be a great starting point for somebody who maybe is questioning, am I an addict? Do I have a problem? Or maybe you have a family member, then you're looking at them like, wow, maybe they have a problem. We're here to try and help whoever it is. So if you're an addict in recovery, welcome. You're exactly where you should be. Hope you hear something you like. If you're an addict who's not in recovery and you think maybe you need to be, welcome. You're exactly where you should be. Hope you hear something you like. If you're a normie who has no direct contact with the disease of addiction, welcome. You're exactly where you should be. Hope you hear something you like. Because the beautiful thing, as we're going to talk about further, about recovery from the disease of addiction is that it is not specific on the use of drugs. Using drugs is simply a symptom of the disease of addiction. So if you've never had an issue with a substance in your life, awesome, but you still might hear something that works for you here. But while there might be some amazing nuggets of information on this podcast is not supposed to replace going to a meeting or calling your sponsor or being of service or having a home group or working steps or going to meetings. I already said that. I said it twice because it shouldn't replace that. But it is just supposed to be an added bonus to try and help. So if you have any questions about anything that we do not discuss here on air, please reach out to me. I would be more than happy to go over that with you accordingly. But we just, to stay in line with the traditions, will not be going into that today. If you are not familiar when I'm saying going over the traditions and making sure we're in line with them, I highly recommend checking out episode 23, yes, 23 of the Clean and Filthy podcast, where we talk about Tradition 11 and why I say this same thing at the beginning of every single episode. So if you're new here, I hope you hear something you like. Hopefully you come back next week and you aren't new anymore. If you are on the live stream right now, what up, YouTube chat? Let's get that chat going. I love going back and rereading the comments after the episode's finished. As I said, we live stream every single Tuesday on youtube.com. If you're interested in participating on that, head to the website, click the YouTube link, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you get a notification as soon as we go live. If you are on the live right now and you want to help us out, please make sure that later tonight you download this episode from whatever podcast directory you use, or all of them. It really helps our numbers grow, and we're so close to getting to our next milestone. We are so close to getting to quadruple digit downloads, and as we talked about before, my refresh button is being absolutely abused trying to watch those downloads creep up and up. So if you want to help me out, and for the sake of my mouse, if you want to save the use of my mouse, I mean, look, you can see on there that the thing's getting worn down. If you want to save my mouse, just go throw me some downloads, and then I won't have to click refresh a bajillion times. So that's what we do. That's what we don't do. That's how to find us. That's how to participate. I love all of you. We got an interesting episode today, y'all. We're doing something different. We are officially on episode 25. And as we've talked about before on this podcast, my initial goal for this podcast was to have 24 episodes released on time, never late. That was my goal. And we succeeded. We succeeded at this goal. Not me. We succeeded at this goal. And everybody out there who's been a part of this journey is just as helpful and important within that success. So I thank each and every one of you for your part in 6 months of success to reaching our first goal. And the beautiful thing about hitting goals is now we get to make new ones. And now we get to grow and proceed. And I know y'all are going to be there with me. And we are going to succeed. So I'm going to tell you again later, but I'm going to tell you now. If nobody has told you that they love you today, I love you. I might not know you. I might never meet you. But I love you as a human being. And thank you for the support, not just with this podcast, but thank you for being a part of my life, whoever you are. And with that being said, let's get into our first segment of the week.
Let's head to the lab for some R&D. Recovery and development.
That's right, y'all. We are in the lab. Recovery and development. This is the part of the show where we talk about a step or a tradition or a spiritual principle or a part of the literature, and we discuss how it impacts us recovering addicts. And this part of the show is very much based on 12-step recovery. We talk about some of my opinion mixed in with that experience, strength, and hope, but this is the meat of the recovery aspect, hence why it's called recovery and development. I will admit, we messed up some numbering issues, But if you are not familiar with what we do on this show, check out episodes 1 through 24 because we work through all 12 steps, all 12 traditions. And now, being that it's episode 25, we had some questions like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? So we decided that I should have done this first. I should have done what I'm about to do at the beginning of the podcast, honestly. But we're going to take a dive into the literature. And we're going to go through each chapter of the literature. And if you're asking which piece of literature, again, I don't want to identify the book because that'll be identifying the fellowship, and I want to stay in line with traditions. But I will say it is our most basic piece of literature. So we're going to go through each chapter, and we're going to discuss how it works within an addict like me. So, being that we are on episode 25, and this is our new thing, we're going to talk about chapter number 1. Entitled, Who is an Addict? Like I said, I know I should have started this because if I would have asked week 1 who is an addict, maybe more people would have gotten an idea that, hey, they were an addict, so let's stick around. Yeah, okay, I fucked up. I'm learning. A beautiful thing of the steps and working them, as we talked about on episode 7, is humility. And being able to admit that I'm human and I make mistakes. And I don't know if that's a mistake. I don't know. Y'all can tell me if you think that was a mistake, but I digress. Let's go. First off, we got to talk about the spiritual principles because as we talked about last week on episode 24, spiritual principles are the keys to the opening up our recovery for an addict like myself. So we have to talk about the spiritual principles that immediately jump out at me when I'm reading through when I'm reading through chapter 1 of Who is an Addict. And they're honesty, acceptance, surrender, open-mindedness, willingness, hope, and unconditional love. And you might be thinking like, wow, how is like the topic of who is an addict lead to unconditional love? But as we progress through, you're going to be able to see it a little bit more. So it says in the literature, as addicts, we are people whose use of any mind-altering, mood-changing substance causes a problem in any area of life. We also have to look at just what is the definition of an addict? What is the definition of an addict? And it says, very simply, an addict is a man or woman whose life is controlled by drugs. Now, I want to put a little caveat in here and say that when this was originally written was before gender identity was really a common concept. So it really should just say an addict is simply a human being whose life is controlled by drugs, in this addict's humble opinion. I don't know what my opinion's worth, but from my perspective, that's something that has always jumped out. It's like, why can't we just change it to any human being? Whatever. I digress. But that's all that matters. We're not talking about what kind of drug you use, as we talked about multiple times on this podcast. The substance we used is not what matters. Though some drugs do usually lead to more, likely ties to addiction. And that's partially because of physical dependence. That's the element of being a heroin addict, or of your, being an addict where your drug of main use was heroin, is going to develop physical dependence on that substance. And that physical dependence on that substance is going to lead much more likely to addiction. But it's not simply about what drugs we used, nor is it about how we use it. Also, while some forms of use do lead to more of an addict perspective, that's not the contingency of if you're an addict or not. I'll say most people who shoot up drugs, that use a needle to shoot up drugs, aren't normies. They're not the type of person who just goes and uses on the weekend and then continues the normal life. But that's not the criteria. And it's not even about how much you use or how often you use. Because there are people who can use a ton of drugs once a year. Somebody could go to EDC and take their body weight in Molly over the weekend and not use again for another year. It says in the literature that our reaction to drugs is what makes us addicts, not how much we use. And nor do the things that we had to do for our drug use dictate being an addict. Because you could say, oh, well, addicts, as I did, addicts are people that are breaking laws. They're people that are being sex workers. They're people that are out committing crimes, doing all these things. But that's not the case. Because somebody who has all the means and all the money in the world could still be an addict. How many rock stars or celebrities do we see who aren't out committing crimes, who aren't out running through Walmart like this addict was, and are still addicts? So that's not a requirement. And that's not something that we really can even put too much stock into. And this is, again, because we talk about the disease of addiction isn't about drugs. Drugs are merely a symptom. It says in the literature, addiction is an insidious disease that affects all area of our lives, even those areas which seem at first to have little to do with drugs. And that's why when we talk about the basis of active addiction isn't about the drug use. It's about the feeling of emptiness, the feeling of bankruptcy, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically. And it says in the literature that the rate of decline varies from addict to addict. And that is all just dependent on somebody's progression through active addiction. Some people hit that feeling of spiritual bankruptcy very quickly. Some people get there very quickly, like, wow, I have a problem. I feel the drug stopped working. I need something different. I need to do something. Help me. And then there are other people who their bottom keeps getting lower and require more and more pain, which I was one of those type of people. I required a lot more pain before I was willing to, as we talked about earlier, that spiritual principle of willingness, willing to attempt anything different. And we're going to talk a lot more about this as we get further down in here. But I got a little game here. If you're listening right now and you're like, well, okay, yeah, I use drugs, but I'm not an addict. I got kind of a way that a lot of people could possibly vibe with. If you're out of drugs or you're out of anything, if the thought process is, wow, I'm out, I have none. If the thought process leads to utter dread, you might be an addict, which isn't for me to say. We'll talk about that a little bit further as well. But that might be a defining characteristic of it. If you're just like, whatever, you might not be. You still might be, but you might not be. And even if you don't have that fear of running out and can stop, we have to be cognizant of the length of time that we actually are stopping. Because I used this justification for years as to why I was not an addict. Multiple times I could stop one substance, but I could never stay stopped. But because I was able to stop that substance by using all these other substances, in my mind, I wasn't an addict. It says in the literature that we looked at the stopping, not the using. As our addiction progressed, we thought of stopping less and less. And that is so true for me. It says in the literature, it says that many of us did not think we had a problem with drugs until the drugs ran out. And that was definitely a story of mine, especially early on in my active addiction. I was making sure that I would never run out. I would always obsess about having enough for multiple days so that I didn't have to worry about. So I didn't have to look at the fact of, wow, I'm feeling withdrawals. If you never stop using, you never feel those withdrawals. And of course, as this is a progressive disease, the ability to have multiple days worth as my amounts went up and my money went down led to some painful, harsh realities, both mentally and physically and emotionally and spiritually. It says in the literature, we did not choose to become addicts. we suffer from a disease that expresses itself in ways that are antisocial and that make detection, diagnosis, and treatment difficult. The basis of the disease of addiction is obsession, compulsion, and total self-centeredness. And those three things, for an addict like me who had so much denial, I could justify that I wasn't really self-centered, even though everything in my life was about finding ways and means to get more. I could justify that I didn't compulsively use, even though I used every however many hours. I could justify that I wasn't really that obsessed about it. I just like having drugs around, It's not that big of a deal. Meh. But at the end of the day, I have a disease. I have the disease of addiction. And this was something I struggled with a lot. I struggled with this concept a lot when I first got in recovery. It was something that was very, very difficult for me when I first came into the rooms. And then I had this grappling thought of like, was I born an addict or did I become an addict? And throughout my time in recovery and talking with other members, I've heard and seen evidence that supports both sides. I've seen some people who have gone through unimaginable traumas or abuse or life events or family members deep in their disease of addiction that all played a part into their own personal act of addiction. But I've also seen people, myself in a lot of ways, where I didn't have any major traumas or any major abuse or major life events that was still predisposed to addictive tendencies. So I feel that it can be a combination of both, because there were things from when I was young that I felt addictive tendencies towards, but they never made my life unmanageable until it became the use of drugs. And then once I started learning about these other things that I was using, then I realized, wow, okay, I've had some issues with multiple things in my life well before I even used drugs, but I never was able to see it until I got into recovery. But one thing I love that the literature says, and this is my thought process with it much more so now, is it says how we got the disease is of no immediate importance to us. We are concerned with recovery. And that was something that really helped me early on when I was still trying to justify and rationalize how I wasn't really an addict, or maybe I, have some addictive tendencies, but I don't have the disease of addiction. And reading that, I'm concerned with recovery. I don't need to worry about all of the things that maybe went into the disease of addiction within me. I don't even need to worry about if I have the disease of addiction. I don't even have to have that thought process. I don't have to have the inner monologue. All I have to do is be concerned with recovery. So we have to, I've mentioned it multiple times already, but we have to talk about denial. Because for an addict like me, denial was the leading contributor of my active addiction for many, many, many years. It says in the literature, some of us used, misused, and abused drugs and still did not consider ourselves addicts. And this was exactly my story. This was exactly my story. I got started a little bit later in my life with using and progressed moderately quickly. And it was just the thing that we did. It was like, hey, it's poker night. Cool, let's go do some lines. That's just what it was. And then when I would be able to stop and I wouldn't use it, I would focus on that. I would focus on that and say, I can't have a problem, because if I did, I wouldn't be able to stop using this. And also that belief that I only had a problem with one thing, which even with my thought process at that time of saying, oh, I only have an issue with this substance, all these other ones are fine, all those other ones ended up leading me back to that substance, the only substance I had a problem with. So obviously, I had a problem with more than one substance. Again, why I love discussing recovery from a non-drug specific perspective. Because at the end of the day, as we talked about earlier, it doesn't matter what we used. What matters is how we felt. What matters is why we used it and the reaction that we had to it. I also had, misconceptions about what an addict was. And of course, being the good addict that I am, I could find those differences. I could say, no, I'm not an addict because I've never done this drug in this way. All right, so now I'm doing this drug in this way, but let's give examples. Let's say I'm not an addict because I've only ever swallowed pills. I've never snorted them. And then the thought is, okay, well, now I'm snorting pills, but I'm not an addict because I've never smoked one. Okay, well, I'm not an addict. Yes, now I'm smoking them, but I'm not an addict because I've never used heroin. Okay, well, now heroin's being used. Okay, but I'm not an addict because I've never been arrested for my drug use. Okay, well, now I've been arrested for it. And the addict mindset will always find that next way to disqualify that I actually am an addict. Because the disease of addiction doesn't want me to stop using, doesn't want me to be in recovery. Fuck out of here. So I always would find ways to justify or to rationalize. I would justify it to rationalize, I just party. I just like to party. Even though I'm using every single day. Even though before I even brush my damn teeth in the morning, which towards the end I didn't do that at all. But even in the beginning, I was doing a substance to get the day started. To attack even the most minute life task of having clean teeth. But I wasn't an addict in my mind. I wasn't an addict because I don't use like those people. I'm not that type of a person. I'm not using that substance like that person. I wanted to do everything I could to disqualify myself. And even when I finally admitted I had a problem, I still denied it really being a problem. Like towards the very, very end, my life was completely unmanageable. It was the most massive dumpster fire. Oh, it's lit. Yeah, it was very lit in a bad way. My life was a complete dumpster fire. Everything in my life was adding together to be the worst possible result. And even then, I couldn't really accept that I had the disease of addiction. I said, okay, I have no other options. I'll go to treatment. And treatment doesn't have to be a part of your story. It isn't the part of a lot of people's story. But for me personally, I went to treatment. But even in treatment, I just said, nah, I only have an issue with this substance, so I'm just not going to use this substance. Or I just have problematic drug use. Or I have chemical dependence disorder. Or I could find every possible way to say, to not have to admit that I was an addict. To not have to admit I had the disease of addiction. And that was something, I had a great moment with one of my therapists in treatment. And he said to me, he goes, okay, if you're not an addict, then don't use drugs for a year. Drugs are not required for you to be alive. So if you're not an addict, then you should not have a problem not using for a year, right? Simple as that. If you don't have a problem, if you are not an addict, then whatever. You just don't use for a year. And hearing that was the one of the first things that really ever started to put a light bulb off in my head. So put it on. Yeah, started to turn the light bulb on in my head. It says in the literature, it says, denial of our addiction kept us sick, but our honest admission of addiction enabled us to stop using. And I'll say that once I made that admission, it was incredibly freeing. Once I was able to honestly look at the evidence, look at the wake of absolute destruction that had been occurring for the last 3+ years. And towards the end, let me tell you, it was bad. I'm not talking glamorous. The beginning of my drug use, yeah, that shit was kind of glamorous, whatever. The end was not at all. And once I got to that thought process and realized, wow, okay, all right, maybe I am an addict. And identifying that, it was such a freeing thing. And it says in the literature, it says, once we identify ourselves as addicts, help becomes possible. And that was the element to where I was finally able to say,
Help me!
So we also have to look at the progression of the disease. And I often will say, if people have heard me share in a meeting or something like that, but I often will say that I don't classify all of my drug use as active addiction. Because, for a lot of people, their initial entry into their first foray into the use of drugs leads them very quickly into recovery. For somebody like me, that wasn't my story. What the line was in my mind looking back on it, it wasn't at the time. At the time, it was all perfectly fine. Everything was fine. I'm fine. It's fine. Everything's fine, even though the world's on fire around me, but it's fine. But for me, when using drugs stopped being something that we did before we went and did something and became the only thing that we did, or towards the end that I did, there was no more social we there. It was just me. That is where my active addiction really, in my mind, took off. To where it became my go-to. It wasn't like, hey, we're going to a concert, let's go use this substance. Or, oh, hey, we're hanging out playing poker, let's use this substance. When it became, hey, I'm waking up, I need to use this substance. Hey, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm joyful, I'm scared, I'm nervous, I'm terrified, I'm anything. And my immediate reaction was to go use. That, to me, was the essence of my true active addiction. More so than the fun party times, even when I was using maybe more than I should. But once it got to be my emotional requirement for life, that to me was active addiction. And I couldn't deal with life on life's terms. So instead I used. If I felt a feeling that I didn't want to operate with, I used. If I felt a feeling that I really liked, I used. And that got to where, as it says in the literature, at some point, our using became uncontrollable and antisocial. And my Lord, the last 3 years of my addiction was just that. We talk about a lot that we live to use and use to live. And that was my story. That was my story every single day of my life for the last 2.5 to 3 years. Everything in my life revolved around finding ways and means to get more, to make it to the next day and then do it again. It says in the literature, we developed a point of view that enabled us to pursue our addiction without concern for our own well-being or the well-being of others. Everything in my life was focused on using. Everything. Every single thing was focused on how to get more. There were no in-betweens. There was no, I'm just going to take tomorrow off and then we'll go back to the grind of using the next. No. Every single day. Schemes to get money, committing crimes, all of these things just to make it another day within my active addiction. It says in the literature that some of the highs felt great, but eventually the things that we had to do to continue using reflected desperation. But in that moment, I was incapable of seeing the desperation. In that moment, I just accepted that this was kind of just my life. This was just the normal vibe. Like, this is just what I do. I go to Walmart, I steal stuff, I return the stuff, I go get whatever, and I feel better. And it says in the literature, and this is so true, that we were proud of the sometimes illegal and often bizarre behavior that typified our using. And this is so true. There would be nights that I felt like It's cool we've been up for 3 days, bro, and we're just searching through this guy's backyard looking for shit that I'm never going to use, but this is cool. And now looking back on it, it's just like, bruh, like, that's not living. That's not fun. That's not social. That's not enjoyable. That's not developing anything more than getting and using. It says in the literature, we talk about it a lot, about life being reduced to an animalistic level. And that was my story, even though I couldn't see it at the time. My denial in the moment made me ignore how brutal life truly was. And then once I look back on it, once I got clean, it was like, whoa, that was my life. Like, one of the things that I did, and I do not recommend this early on in recovery. I recommend this once you've gotten some time. But I went back through all my old photos, and the amount of pictures of things that I took of random shit that I don't even know why I ever took it, but I've got 10,000 pictures of random junk. Like, it was a fun time of deleting, but it was also a little triggering, so I don't recommend it for somebody super early on. I digress. But even if we have seen all of these things I'm discussing, all of the denial, all of the somebody's life absolutely falling apart, I personally, or you, my viewers and listeners, cannot tell someone that they are an addict. It says in the literature, we feel that each individual has to answer the question, am I an addict? And that is something that if I tell somebody that they're an addict, immediately that's going to lead to denial. That's going to lead to defensive, no, I'm not. That would have been my reaction to it. But by making the admission to myself, it was such a powerful admission. I was able to do that. It's what we talked about even with anonymity before, why we don't break somebody else's anonymity. That's for them to do. This process of discovering, okay, I'm an addict, I have a problem, is each addict's individual process. But there is a great resource. There's a great resource out there. If you're questioning, wow, maybe am I an addict? Do I have a problem? I highly recommend reading IP number 7, entitled, Am I an Addict? It's a very simple 29 question yes or no test. Not even a test, just a little informational pamphlet that you answer yes or no to. I personally answered yes to 28 out of the 29 questions. And this was while believing I was not an addict. I don't have the disease of addiction. I just like using drugs. I just have a problem with one substance. And this was a huge moment for me because I remember it plain as day reading it in treatment. I had probably 10 days clean. And they had a rack of IPs, and I read through it, and I was like, I answered, stopped looking at it because it answered yes to so many, came back with a little bit more willingness, a little bit more open-mindedness to finish it. Tried to justify a couple of them like, well, it wasn't exactly like that, so I guess I don't need to say yes, right? And finally developed enough willingness and honesty and open-mindedness to answer yes to 28 out of the 29 questions. And even then, I still wasn't willing to admit that I was truly an addict that truly had the disease of addiction. But that reading through those questions planted some element of a seed for recovery. And within that, as am I an addict? This is I love this quote. It says, "Am I an addict? This is a question only you can answer. We found that we all answered different numbers of these questions yes. The actual number of yes responses wasn't as important as how we felt inside and how addiction had affected our lives." And that is what matters the most. And that's why some of the questions within those questions have nothing to do with drugs, have nothing to do directly with drugs. And I have personally never seen in the rooms anybody who's read through those 29 questions and not answered yes to at least one, usually numerous of them. But even if you answer yes all to 29 out of 29 of those questions, until someone is truly willing to do something until I am willing to do something about my addiction, nothing will change. Simply admitting that I was an addict didn't make my life better. It wasn't like, okay, yes, I'm an addict. I have the disease of addiction. Everything's done. Nah. We talk about how much of an action program this is, and we'll continue talking about that in the next couple of weeks. It requires constant action. It requires the desire to learn and grow and become a better human being and find a new way to live. But anybody can do it. There's nobody out there that is not capable of working this program within their lives. That's where the hope piece comes in that we talked about earlier with the spiritual principles. That's where the unconditional love piece comes in. Because being an addict, to me, is a beautiful thing. It says in the literature, it says, like other incurable diseases, addiction can be arrested. We agree that there is nothing shameful about being an addict, provided we accept our dilemma honestly and take positive action. Whew. And for me, that action, baby, I'm about that action because I want to get the best that I can out of recovery. And today, I am very proud to say that I'm an addict in recovery.
That part.
There are people who aren't, and that's fine. But for me personally, I don't feel any shame in the fact that I'm an addict. Maybe I'll still feel a little bit of guilt for some of the things I did in my active addiction. Actual shame is not something that I actually feel today in terms of being an addict. That's just not how it is for me personally. Because of working this program, because of having a spiritual connection with my higher power, I can say I'm proud of the struggles I've been through. Because today, sitting here right now, I am the best version of myself that I've ever been. If I wasn't an addict, I never would have gotten into recovery. I never would have learned these things about myself to become the best version of myself that I am today. And anybody can do that, like I said. It says in the literature, the only alternatives to recovery for an addict are jails, institutions, and dereliction and death. I've already been to two out of those. I've been to jail, been in an institution. My life, dereliction was pretty solid as well. And as we talked about last week, death is always around the corner. Death is always a possibility for an addict who's not focusing on their recovery. I'm going to close with this quote. I really like this quote, but it says, "We realize that we are never cured and that we carry the disease within us for the rest of our lives. We have a disease, but we do recover. Each day, we are given another chance." That part.
That part. That part. That part. That part. That part.
So that's what we have for this week in the lab. Welcome. Hopefully you come back next week where we will have even more in-depth discussions about the literature. And now everybody knows kind of what we're going to be doing here. We're going to be working through some chapters, and we've got kind of a plan set up for what we're going to be doing going forward. So come back next week, and we will get more into it. Sorry, anybody who's on the live stream right now. My main camera just went wonky, so now you got me in my backup camera. But I digress. We proceed. That's what we do here. All right, y'all. Now it is time for our second segment of the show, entitled My Favorite Moment of the Week. And while we are still not sponsored by Bang Energy, we will still do a free ad read. What is the best way to enjoy the Clean and Filthy podcast? With a wonderful bang in hand. Our host, Matthew M., consumes a bang during, after, and before most, if not every, podcast. So you want to be clean and filthy? Grab you a bang with 300 milligrams of caffeine, Ultra CoQ10, EAA aminos, and super creatine in a huge assortment of delectable flavors. Matthew M's favorite happens to be key lime in the afternoon. Grab yourself a bang best way to enjoy the Clean and Filthy podcast. Be clean and filthy with a bang in hand. All right. I'm trying to give some variety here, so when I edit it all together and start inundating every single person at Bang with please sponsor me, look at what the ad reads I do, I've got some variety in there. So we're trying to keep it fresh. All right, y'all. So this is the part of the show where we discuss something that has happened over the last week. It could be something from news, pop culture, sports, from Instagram, social media, some major stories, just something that popped off. That's what we do. This is just a time for me to talk about fun things that have happened over the last week. This is not focusing on the experience, strength, and hope within recovery. That's not what we're here doing. This is just a part of the show where we just get to talk about some cool shit that's happened over the last week. So, got to get into it. First off, I got to drink some Bang. I got to say, this has been an interesting week. I am currently in COVID protocol. I had a potential interaction. I picked up my son and then got a call that his mother has COVID. So we've been in a super locked down state. Already had 2 tests. Thankfully, both have come back negative. I still got about 3 more days before, according to the CDC guidelines, I should be good. And with how scary the numbers are right now, I'm not taking any chances. So it's definitely a weird kind of week. And the whole co-parenting in the middle of a pandemic is definitely a difficult thing. So shout out to any and all single parents out there. I don't know how y'all do it. I don't know. I'm doing what I can. But my goodness, I need to sleep. I just need a day to sleep. Maybe that'll be my favorite moment of the week for next week, where I just sleep for like 38 straight hours. Just sleep. All right. I digress. Got to talk about one thing. I made a mistake last week regards to the Olympics. I said that it was actually the Australian coach who was wilding out, not the Brazilian coach. So I got to make mention of that. Also, the only thing I'm going to talk about the Olympics, because still, I just don't really care, is about Simone Biles. Shout out to old girl coming back and working through, some things to compete and get a bronze medal on the balance beam. And everybody out there who are talking shit to Simone Biles, and all these people who have no qualifications at all, it's incredible. Like, people watch the Olympics who are these are the absolute best athletes in the entire known galaxy that we've had contact with, that are doing things that 99.9% of us could never even fathom of doing, and we're sitting there critiquing it, myself included. Just sitting there, there have been some great memes about that of, like, somebody laying on the couch, shoving Cheetos in his mouth, talking shit about the people who are competing at a level that they will never get to. So as Juicy J would say, if you have something negative to say about Simone Biles, shut the fuck up! I need to get that as a button, because I love that little Juicy J. Shut the fuck up! All right. We're going to go a little bit, we're just going to do a little bit of sports today, just a little bit. Because I wasn't out for the last week. I didn't have a bunch of life experiences over the last week to pull off of here. So it was internet and it was sports. That's what we're working off of. So there's sadly, no NBA finals. And this is a weird thing. This has been one of the biggest moments within the show, is talking about the NBA. But there was an NBA draft and some crazy trades. First off, when it comes to the draft, I love the wholesome videos like we talked about with the NFL draft. I love the wholesome videos of people getting drafted. And the fits that some of these dudes were wearing literally looked like they could have been worn by Algae Rhythm from Space Jam. We talked about that. Literally. We're also going to talk about Don Cheadle a little bit further on here. But some of those, the sparkliest of sparkly suits, I ride with it. I love sparkly suits, so I vibe with that hard. But first off, how the fuck is Russell Westbrook a Laker? Like, real talk. The fuck? Like, what? Plus, they brought back Dwight Howard and Trevor Ariza. It's funny. Richard Jefferson, who's a retired ESPN NBA analyst, sent LeBron a tweet that says, "I'm ready. come in and play for the veteran minimum because they're bringing everybody back. And if they can figure out who's going to have the ball and who's going to get the rebounds and who's going to get the assists and stay healthy, that will be a problem. The Lakers will be a problem. I personally love Russ. I think it's cool he's coming back to play in L.A. because he's from L.A. area. So I hate it, but just even better when the Suns beat them next season. That part. Speaking of the Suns, Chris Paul has re-signed. There was some worry. There was some fear. Chris Paul is back. 4-year deal up to $120 million. Kyle Lowry went to the Heat. Lonzo Ball went to Chicago. Plus, the bald eagle Alex Caruso signed a deal in Chicago as well. There was some crazy, crazy trades. A bunch of people re-signed. Kawhi Leonard opted out of his contract, but it's assumed he's going to stay in L.A. with the Clippers, so nothing too crazy there. But just lots of craziness, and it's just going to continue, I'm sure. So we might talk about it again later. I don't know. We'll see. Got to talk about the weekly fitness update. My weekly fitness update from the last episode is that I have not worked out one time. As I mentioned previously, I've been in COVID protocol. So I have not been able to go to a gym. And honestly, I haven't had the time or mental wherewithal to do an at-home workout. Just haven't. Having a 3-year-old who wants to play blocks constantly and we're in the process of potty training, the daddy ain't getting daddy time, solo daddy time to work out. And that's the beauty of being a parent, is that I'm able today to be able to care for this little human being. And if that means that I don't get to work out for a week, that means I don't get to work out for a week. It's funny because I'm a little salty because as we've talked about, my plan for all of August is to be doing nothing but core and cardio. And last week, my pre-workout that I ordered from Europe, because they don't sell it in America anymore, came in, and I was so excited to have 3 days of lifting. And then possible COVID exposure happened. And so now I just have my pre-workout sitting there, and it's not even going to get open for like another month. Unfortunate. Another fun thing, I'm back dog babysitting. So that means I'm Xbox babysitting. So if anybody wants to play some Call of Duty Warzone or just watch me destroy my cousin's kill-death ratio, holla at your boy. I will send you the gamer tag. Shout out to the USA men's soccer team as well for winning the Gold Cup at the 117th minute. And it was against Mexico, and Mexico games are always fun. I remember way back in the day, I watched a World Cup Mexico game with like a family of people who were super Mexico supporters, and it was a lot of fun. I'm pretty sure that the U.S. lost, but regardless, it was still a lot of fun. Hopefully, you can carry this over to a World Cup result because I like soccer. From the world of TikTok, we have to talk about a couple things. They're both Marvel related. But first off, there was this amazing breakdown of a TikTok saying that Matt Damon, who has had a cameo in Thor Ragnarok, is actually a part of MCU canon, that he's actually a variant because he was in a movie called The Adjustment Bureau, which is owned by Miramax, which was by Miramax, which is owned by Disney. So in fact, from the beginning, the entire movie, The Adjustment Bureau, was actually just a low-key variant played by Matt Damon. It was hilarious. But this was the closest I've been to signing up to TikTok. There was a video with the song of For the Longest Time playing, a song by Billy Joel, and this girl just keeps disappearing. Just disappearing on and then coming back. Disappearing, coming back. Disappearing, coming back. Kind of going boop, 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 boop. If you're watching at home, you're seeing that. And then she's like, what's going on? And then it turns out that it's Thanos singing karaoke to that song because there's constant snaps in it. That was gold. That was absolute gold. So good. It was, oh my God, it was so good. It was absolutely incredible. I loved it so much. Whoever made that, I don't even know, but well done. Got to talk about the Hungarian Grand Prix for a second for my zero Formula One fans, but maybe we'll grow some. The race started with Lewis Hamilton on the pole in the rain, and again, turn one, Mercedes was involved in a crash. This time, it was Bottas, not Lewis. This caused the race to be red flagged because they had to have the track cleaned. And during that time, everybody, the entire track got dry. And one of the craziest things I've ever seen in the history of any kind of racing is that every single other person in the field went to the pits to change their tires except for Lewis Hamilton, and he restarted the race as the only car going. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was absolutely crazy. While everybody was switching their tires, he got a little bit of a lead, but then sadly, he had to go and change his tires, came back out in ninth place, and ended up coming all the way back to challenging for the podium. If you want to see amazing race car driving, watch the back and forth between Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton. It was absolutely crazy. And even though I wanted Lewis to pass him because I wanted Lewis to have a shot to win, just seeing the whole thing was just an absolute masterclass of how to properly defensively drive. Ended up leading at the very end. Hamilton was able to take third place, which got upgraded to second place because Sebastian Vettel was disqualified for a post-race fuel test. So Esteban Ocon winning his first ever Formula One Grand Prix was amazing. Shout out to him. And even bigger shout out that going into the summer break, Lewis Hamilton is back in first place by 6 points. It might have even gone up because he got upgraded from third to second. I'm not sure. But it was amazing. Very sad that Formula One's going into its summer break, but that's just what it does every year. So you're not going to be having to hear about any Formula One for the next couple weeks. You're welcome. I also have to give a huge shout out to one of our biggest supporters on this podcast who today completed a absolutely incredible, prestigious scientific internship and has officially moved on to bigger and brighter opportunities, and it's just massively impressive. So congratulations. Very well done. Other than that, I haven't been out, so I've been on lockdown a lot. So please send me your TikToks. Send me your Instagrams. Send me recommendations because I need them. But I did have, of those things, I did have a favorite moment of the week. And I got to first give a huge thank you to HBO Max. I also have to give a shout out to my boy who gave me his HBO Max login information. No, wait, is there a statute of limit? No, I'm not saying any of that. Nope, delete that. We're just... Nope, none of that was just said. All right, cool. Shout out to HBO Max for coming out with movies on the same time as releases because I got to watch No Sudden Move. And No Sudden Move was fire. Came out last month. I'll admit I'm a little bit late. Sorry. Again, I was grasping at straws for my favorite moment of the week, so sorry. But it's a 1950s crime movie set in Detroit that really kept me surprised and guessing until the end. You know, focused around what was supposed to be a simple, low-level criminal job, and it devolved into a full-on mobster-style conspiracy involving... I don't want to give anything around about it away, but involving some deep level Detroit in the 50s type of things, all while discussing race relations and urban revitalization and class differences and oppression and the impact of major corporations have or had on society. And anytime something takes place in Detroit, I vibe with it. I've got a lot of family in Michigan. I've spent a lot of time in Detroit, and I've always loved the city. I've always loved architecture. Detroit has some of the greatest architecture in the country, and it's so sad to see the city crumbling, to be an absolute hub of our country, to then crumbling. And it's interesting, they even start discussing some of the elements of that in the movie. So that was kind of an interesting, like when it first was starting, that now has led to where it's at now. It was directed by Steven Soderbergh, who is one of my favorite, most consistent directors. He's won an Oscar for Traffic. He won the Palme d'Or in Cannes for Sex, Lies, and Videotape. He's directed the Ocean's 11, 12, 13 trilogy. 2 out of those 3 were really, really, really good. 1 was not. He directed Aaron Brockovich, Contagion, Side Effects, Out of Sight, Magic Mike, which was a really well-made movie. Anybody who wants to fight me and say Magic Mike was trash, we can throw down. Because it was, yes, there was a lot of man-ass in it. Yes, it was a lot of unnecessary type of stuff, honestly. But it was a really well done movie. And I thank all of that man ass for being in that movie and all them damn G-strings, because every single day I have motivation. Every single day. Every single day I have motivation. So shout out to Magic Mike. That was a great movie. Shout out to Steven Soderbergh for it. I digress. Even his movies that I didn't really like were still very well filmed and directed. Like Haywire, Logan Lucky, The Informant. Wasn't that big. I didn't care about those, but they were still well done. But the cast for this movie was phenomenal. We had Don Cheadle starring in it. As we talked about in my Space Jam discussion, I love Don Cheadle, obviously from the MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, but from Crash, The Guard, Hotel Rwanda, Traitor, House of Lies, Brooklyn's Finest, Traffic, the Ocean series, as well as Family Man, and pretty much everything he's been in, he's been solid. I also have Benicio del Toro, who is one of the most consistent actors there is. He is part of two of my favorite movies of all time, 21 Grams and Snatch. Plus, he's got an MCU connection as well. He's the Collector. He was amazing in Traffic, Sin City, Things We Lost in a Fire, Sicario 1 and 2, and Usual Suspects. Plus, we had David Harbour. We just talked about him 2 weeks ago. He's Mr. Red Guardian from Black Widow. He's amazing in Stranger Things. He was awesome in Extraction, and he was in Hellboy. And side note, and I'm not breaking his anonymity because he talks about it all the time, but he has over 20 years in recovery. And his wife is going to be getting a shout out on this podcast later on in the Clean Time shout-outs. Just saying. Plus, the rest of the cast had John Hamm, had Brendan Fraser, who I was surprised when I looked at his IMDb page. He's actually been working and acting in a movie, at least one movie, or have one appearance every single year since The Mummy. I thought the dude had completely fallen off. I hadn't seen him in anything since The Mummy, but he was there. Amy Simons, Kieran Culkin, Julia Fox, and Ray Liotta, which Ray Liotta, anytime as a gangster, I am all in. It is one of the most completely typecast to death things in Hollywood. But if it's got Ray Liotta as a gangster, I'm there. If it's got Al Pacino as a gangster, I'm there. Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, I'm there. I don't care if I've seen it 1,000 times. Also has a cool Matt Damon cameo. And I got to give a rest in peace shout out to Craig Grant, also known as Mums. This was his last film credit ever. He died from diabetes. And I loved him in Oz. Loved it. But the movie overall, it had such a great pacing to it. There were so many pieces of the story that started to become known to the audience at the same time as they were becoming known to the characters in the movie. And it was really cool how they developed that and let it naturally, organically kind of progress within the story. And there's this thought process to the whole thing where you're kind of like questioning, so who's the good guy? You know, who's actually the good guy? And the thought process at the end of it is, was there really any good guy? I'm not spoiler alerting. I'm just saying, was there really any good guy in the movie? And what I also liked about it, because Steven Soderbergh is known for crime capers and for having crews in his films. But what I liked is, unlike the Ocean's films, where they were put together with like the best of the best when it comes to whatever you need to rob a casino, this was a very meh type of squad. These were not that great, not that organized, very sloppy. It's even mentioned that a few times. And I liked that element to it. Also, the angles of which it was shot and the set design was phenomenal. Really, really, really enjoyed it. It's one of those movies I really think once I see it again, I will even start to notice more of those type of elements. And even though this was another Steven Soderbergh crime caper type of film, it felt so much different than any from the past. And it's incredible to me when one director can make multiple entries into the same genre and still have such a different feeling to it. Because I love Martin Scorsese, right? I love him. But even his gangster movies start to feel similar. While they're still incredible, they start to feel similar. Whereas this actually had a different feeling to it than previous Soderbergh crime caper types of films. So I think that's really impressive when somebody can enter it's It's like if you were a football player and you have always played quarterback, and now all of a sudden you're going to go into the same game and be a punter. That probably wasn't a good analogy, but whatever. To me personally, that was really impressive. I really liked it. Well, it wasn't as good as, Goodfellas or Casino or The Godfather or any of the Mount Rushmore of gangster movies. And I don't even think it was as good as some of his movies, like Ocean's 11, Traffic. I personally loved Out of Sight, so Out of Sight probably wasn't that great of a movie comparatively, but I've always loved that movie, so fight me on that. But at the end of the day, it was very enjoyable and worth watching. I give it an 8 out of 10, so I highly recommend checking it out. Let me know what you think. Send me information as to how you feel about it, if you think my review of it was on target or if I missed the mark. I always like to have interaction with people. And also, I still have at least a couple more days of COVID protocol lockdown vibe, so I need stuff to watch. And when whenever I have a break from absolutely decimating, and my cousin's kill to death ratio on Call of Duty and sucking horribly, I'm going to probably want to watch something. So send over your recommendations. Send me those TikToks. Send me those things to keep me occupied, because being like solo dolo, it's not fun. Quarantine sucks. So that's what we got for this week in my favorite moment of the week. Hopefully, I don't have any issue with health over the next week, and I have a new awesome favorite moment of the week for next week. If you have anything you want me to check out, like I said, send it over to me on any social media or Matthew at CleanAndFilthyPodcast.com, and maybe it'll get mentioned on next week's episode. All right, y'all. It's time now for us to get into our third segment of the week.
It's time to Ask an Addict with your host, Matthew M.
That's right, y'all. It is time to Ask an Addict. This is the part of the show where this resident addict, the resident addict of the Clean and Filthy podcast, answers questions that are submitted by, by our listeners and our viewers. This is not full of experience, strength, and hope, though I put a lot of my opinion in here. But if you have a question that you're curious about, something about recovery, something that doesn't have anything to do with recovery, this is where we answer those. As we talked about last week, where we were discussing crackers that have nothing to do with recovery, I just like answering questions. So if you have any questions, please send them over, again, on any social media, or directly through the website, or directly through my email. However, just ask me questions. I like answering questions. So I have to give a little clarification, because after last week's episode, somebody was atting me, bro. Somebody was atting me hard. They were going at me about the fact that a graham cracker isn't a cracker. To him, a graham cracker is a biscuit. This motherfucker. Really? That's what you're saying? It says cracker in the name, but it's a biscuit? Really? That's what you're going to say? That's what you're going to say? You're going to tell me that I'm wrong when it says it in the name. I don't buy it. I think you're wrong, sir. That's what I think.
That part.
Yeah. Anyway, I digress. It's a fucking cracker. I digress. All right. So, first question we asked, and this actually ties in with some of the things we were talking about earlier. It says, how many times was I arrested during my active addiction? And this really speaks to how bad things got the last 3 years of my active addiction. Because I went from never having been arrested to being arrested 7 times with 5 felony charges in the span of 2.5 to 3 years. Literally 7 times. I can tell you intently what the jails look like at Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, 4th Avenue, the holding cell off of Union Hills, the holding cell off of like 35th Avenue in, I think it's Peoria. I could tell you very well what it used to look like at Central Booking before they changed it over and didn't do Central Booking anymore. And I'm not happy about that. There are a few things as horrible as withdrawing, waiting for the very, very slow hands of the legal system, hating every second of 4th Avenue. And it still, even going through all of that, I still didn't believe that I was an addict. That was one of those things that I said when I first was qualifying or disqualifying myself. I would say, yeah, I can't be an addict because I've never been arrested. And then I got arrested. And then I said, okay, well, I can't be an addict because I've never got a felony charge. And then I got a felony charge. And thankfully, because of being in recovery, I was able to get those felony charges reduced. And I was able to do, so I'm not a felon and I don't have those felonies on my name. And that's simply because of recovery, of working the program. I no longer have, that's not something I have to worry about anymore. But in that span, I got arrested 7 times. 7 times, 5 felonies. Might have even been 8 times. Because there was one time they arrested me, but they didn't take me to jail. They just gave me a court date that I didn't show up for, of course. So that led to another warrant, which led to a more. It was an absolute clusterfuck. And I can truly say that not having to worry about that today is one of the greatest freedoms that I could have ever wished for within recovery. So if you're out there and you've never gotten arrested and you've got the same thought process that I did, well, I can't be an addict because I've never gotten arrested. As we talked about earlier, at least jails, institutions, and death. At some point, something's going to happen, and jail will become a reality. But it doesn't have to be. You can get out before it becomes that. You don't have to be like me. So that's how many times I've been arrested. There you go. All right, next question. I love this one because it's so true within so many people when they first get in recovery. It says, why do you think that so many addicts put down the spoon and pick up the fork? So what does that mean? Somebody who's not a part of recovery probably has never heard the saying. What it means is that you put down the spoon, which usually a spoon is used to some type of pre-planned way to use a substance, whether it be heroin, whether it be cooking, crack, whatever. A spoon is used. It's a common thing. Spoon. Okay. Why do they put it down and pick up the fork? So what does that mean? When you come into recovery, you stop using drugs, but you start gaining weight. And that, there are a lot of elements to that. And it happens with so many of us. So many of us. And for me personally, when I first went to treatment, I needed to eat. I was eating once every day and a half to like 2.5, 3 days, any actual food. And so I needed to put on some weight. But of course, being an addict, I went from eating once every day and a half to eating 5 times a day. I was the dude in treatment who at midnight would saunter out to the lunch area, take the whole loaf of delicious white bread, make up 4 peanut butter and honey sandwiches, and gobble them bitches down. Gobble. And then would do it the next night as well if they restocked the bread. I put on like 45 pounds, literally. I put on like 45 pounds in like 3.5, 4 months. It was a lot. But there was an element that we talk about, this element of control, where that was still something that I could control. That was still something that made me feel kind of good, feel like, oh, yeah, well, okay, I'm not using, I'm just going to eat. And there's this element of being able to control something that we aren't using drugs anymore. So having something that I am in control of, even if that means I'm adding a lot more to it, that's what it is. And also we have to look at, there's chemical release from a lot of foods that we consume. That's one of the reasons that I talk about that my relationship with food a lot of times wouldn't really be considered healthy. When I'm having this, I'm going to congratulate myself for having a good podcast episode by eating 5,000 calories. That, for an addict like me, that's not a good thought process to have. To associate reward with something unhealthy is not a positive thought process for somebody like me. So that's why we talk about that a lot. And for a lot of us, that's just what we do. We don't know how to regulate things. We're addicts. So we start doing everything to excess. And that's why so many of us gain a ton of weight when we get clean. That's what we do. It's a known thing. So there's a lot of elements to it. I do think there are some elements of control that are mentioned within it, but I think it also goes a little bit deeper with just the thought process of how we associate within the disease of addiction certain things that make us feel outside of ourselves, certain things that make us feel different. Because I'll tell you right now, if I'm feeling sad and I go and eat a goddamn pint of Haagen-Dazs dulce de leche ice cream, I'm going to feel better in that moment. And then I'm going to feel even worse afterwards when I realize that I just consumed, stupid amounts of calories. But I think when we're in that feeling, we want to use something to escape. And so many of us, because we can't use drugs anymore, we've talked about that because we are addicts. It's something else that allows us to get outside of ourselves by just a little bit. And it's okay. It's why we've talked about sex. It's why we talk about porn. It's why we talk about food. It's why we talk about money or shopping, gambling, because these are all things that are not drugs, but still directly relate to the disease of addiction and can manifest in ways that make our lives absolutely unmanageable. We're going to go into this a lot deeper. So that's what we got. Had another question here. This is a question that I actually got on Twitter, and this is a cool question. And this is something that I'm actually posing to all my listeners. Do you think if you were guaranteed $100 million at the end of it, could you be homeless for 5 years? And I'm not saying homeless like couch surfing homeless. I'm not saying like living in a car homeless. I'm saying like where you are today, could you live 5 years making $20 million a year to be destitute homeless? And immediately my first thought was, yeah, I could do that. I could do that. I'll just go live in a tent for 5 years, whatever. But when I actually logically looked at it, when I actually logically looked at how that would look in my life today, it wouldn't be physically possible. I wouldn't be able to do this podcast. I wouldn't be able to be in my son's life like that. We wouldn't be hanging out here during quarantine. I wouldn't be able to have developed the relationships with the people in my life that I have. So even though my initial thought process was like, yeah, I could do that. I could do that, no problem. To actually look at the logistics that would be required within that, as much as I feel like I could, quote unquote, it wouldn't actually be possible. So I'm curious what everybody else's opinion is on that. Like, don't do what I did initially and say, yeah, definitely could. I could do anything for any amount of money, whatever. Because I've always liked, the thought process of like, they have those TV shows. Like, can you survive for a year in the Arctic North for $1 million? And my thought is like, yeah, I'll try it. Shit. You going to give me $1 million at the end of it? Cool. And this thing's saying, you going to give me 100 milli? You going to give me 100 honey buns? Let's do it. But to give up what I've developed over the last 3.5 years of my life, and I'm not saying I would give it all up because I'm not saying I would go use, but to be living in such a different way, I don't think would be possible. So it's weird. I've always said, yeah, I could do that, whatever. But to actually do it, I don't think it would be possible. So I'm curious what you guys think out there. Would you be able to be completely homeless, not living in a car, not couch surfing, like living in a tent, being homeless for 5 years to get $100 million? I don't know. I like thought processes like that. I do those type of things all the time in my mind. Like, would you rather? Could you do this? I don't know. That's just how my brain operates. So that's what we've got for this segment, this section of Ask an Addict. If you have questions you want to be answered, like I said, they do not have to be recovery related. They can be about anything, y'all. I just like answering questions, so send them over and we will add them to the script. That's what we'll do, and we'll talk about them. So please send them over on any social media. I just like answering questions. So we are almost out of time, y'all. But we can't close up without them clean time shout outs. This is the part of the show where we give shout outs for anybody who's celebrating extended amounts of clean time, hitting those clean time milestones within the program. And they are anybody with 29 days or less as a newcomer, anybody with 30 days clean, 60 days clean, 90 days clean, 6 months clean, 9 months clean, 1 whole year clean, 18 months clean, and multiples of years clean. But here at the Clean and Filthy Podcast, we like to give extra shout outs because this shit gets your boy hype. So we give shout outs for any of them big numbers, like 100 days, 500 days, 5,000 days, 10,000 days, whatever it is. If it's a big number, send it over. If you are celebrating clean time between right now and when we go to air next Tuesday at 5 p.m., send it over to your boy, and I will give you a shout out because I love doing clean time. It makes me so happy. This is what we do. Also, we give them books for each year, something we've been doing at my home group, and that's just how we vibe. So let's get to these clean time shout outs. First and foremost, as a newcomer, we got my boy Dustin. Good job, brother. I'm proud of you, man. I'm glad you're here, brother. Glad you're here. Known this dude since as long as I can remember. So I'm glad you're here, man. Most important person. Next up with 90 days clean, we've got Danny. Well done. And then with 90 days clean, we got Emma from Twitter. Well done. And then with 1 whole year clean, also from Twitter, we got Ricardo L. And then also from Twitter, with 2 years clean, we've got Coach Cole. And then also with 2 years clean, we've got Lily A. And with 3 years clean, we've got Jada. And with 4 years clean from Vegas, we got my homegirl Crystal L. That part. I love she's got a tattoo that says that part on her hand. Shout out to her. And then finally, with 7 years clean, also from Twitter, we've got Jen. Well done. Congratulations, anybody who picked up clean time today. If you didn't pick up clean time today, don't use and guess what, you will. That is literally how this process works. And remember that every single day clean is a successful day. That part, that part, that part, that part, that part. Whew. All right, y'all. Well, we are just about at the end of the show, but I want to take a special second to say thank you so much for all the support. 6 months of support, and we're where we are all because of everybody out there. So hopefully you picked up something that you really liked today. Hopefully you heard something that'll keep you coming back. Hopefully you heard something you want to share with somebody else, because that's how we grow. So thank you all so very much. Like I said before, I love each and every one of you. Thank you for being a part of my life. And thank you for a great episode 25 in the bag. Huge thank you again to our episode sponsor, Etc. by Emily. All of her information below. Huge thank you to our podcast theme music, Anything, by Valentino Khan, Alice in Wonderland. Shout out to them. Info down below as well. And as always, I couldn't do this alone. We do this together. Make sure to go download the episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Share them to everybody. And I will see y'all next week, 5 p.m.
I just wanna